top to bottom. We also want to kind of talk about this concept of, an executive sponsor. And again, a lot of people talk about really the executive sponsor and the need for one. But to even some of the earlier comments, we find that very often executive sponsors kind of kick things off, and everybody has the best of intentions. And then they somehow fade kind of into the landscape as the project gets going. And we've seen time after time, again, that it's a significant difference an involved executive sponsor can make to make sure that the business is committing to the resources that are required, to be breaking down barriers where they exist, to really be your advocate for change. And from a core project team perspective, you need to really make sure that you are utilizing the executive sponsor appropriately. Again, you only want to bring out that trump card when in fact you really need it, and it's really important to be judicious with their time. So we're going to talk about or we'd like to get some feedback from you. Again, is on the topic of an executive sponsor. What are some of the outcomes or the effects of not having an executive sponsor engaged throughout the implementation life cycle that you've seen? And if you could be very specific, or as specific as possible to a situation, again, maybe that it would be real helpful for us to be able to kind of talk about that in more detail. So again, we'll just give you a minute to answer the question in terms of the executive sponsor's engagement. Okay, so we have a couple responses coming in. Some of the first things we're seeing here is the lack of your ability to push the project if in fact it gets stalled. And yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Again, you can feel kind of like you're out there really busting your butt to really make a difference. And if things get stalled along the way and you don't have an executive sponsor to kind of be a spearhead through the circumstances, it may be really challenging.
I like Shannon's response there. Projects become very low on other people's priority lists.
Yep, Liz, no one has the big stick. We have to agree with you there. Yeah, definitely breeds resistance, gives maybe too much flexibility by all line managers, Rolf. Again, less accountability. You can't get your voice heard. Again, these are some very, very common things that we see. You just need to have them on board. So some recommendations around executive sponsorship, that things you might want to take into consideration is again, get your sponsor as high up in the organization as possible. And this even ties back to the alignment issue. If you do have good alignment and you do have a good story, typically it's not as hard to get an executive sponsor on board. Again, it's all about our ability as kind of the core project team to build that business case, to make it compelling, so that we can get someone to really identify that story as a winning story that they want to be involved with. And if we can make it a winning story and not something that we need to kind of trudge through the organization with, it's definitely easier to get someone higher up in the organization to sign up and spend some time. You also want to make sure you select someone around where I would say the largest affected part of the organization is. So again, so let's say it's a new CRM we're implementing and it's being driven a lot by the IT side of the business, but the sales and support part of the organization is there. We definitely need to sponsor, hopefully from both of those areas that are working in tandem to meet a common set of business objectives. But if there are more people that are going to be affected ultimately on the sales and service side, which is typically the case, you need to make sure that the sponsor is representing the business side, again, to make sure that you don't run into some of the challenges that some of the people have talked about in their comments today. Also want to make sure, again, you get them in agreement and have them involved with the charter we talked about earlier, and have them have a say in kind of forging the story from where you may have brought it to them. Another important aspect of it that we see is really kind of being very, very upfront in establishing what the communication cycle is going to be with that executive sponsor. Are you going to be looking at a 2-week status update or a monthly based on the length of the project? And you need to make sure you kind of get that agreed upon and scheduled into their calendars as soon as possible. And and be really respectful of that time. In other words, making sure that you're coming with a format that everyone's agreed on of how we're going to kind of communicate status, challenges, risks, etc. Making sure, if possible, that's communicated in advance of the meeting time. And really doing, again, being respectful of their time, you can find that you'll have more executive sponsors willing to work with you if they know that you're going to treat them in a way that is really kind of helping them be most effective for you with the least amount of impact on their schedule. And the last thing, which I think is enormously important, is as you do communicate to the executive sponsors, you need to, I think, really make sure you're being truthful in terms of relaying good and bad information and news to the executive sponsor. A lot of times we have a tendency to try to present always that best foot forward, but if we're not being truthful in some of the challenges that we are up against, and they kind of are in the background kind of smoldering, we want to make sure that we can kind of stamp them out before they turn into something that really needs some significant attention.